This is draft season, presented by Moody's, a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity, learn more at Moody's.com. Welcome to draft season, everybody. John Schmeelk, joined as always by Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda. And as I teased last week, we're joined this week by friend of the program, Dane Brugler, who is the best draft analyst around for The Athletic. Dane, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing well. Always fun joining you guys. This is such an interesting draft class. It feels like, I don't know, at least for me, it's a little bit tougher to have some conviction about guys at the top of this class, some of the quarterbacks. This is going to be a really interesting draft class as we go through the process, finishing the season, all-star games, combine. I feel like there's going to be more parity than we're used to, just because there's going to be a lot of differing opinions from team to team, evaluator to evaluator. But that's going to make this class a lot of fun to talk about.
Shockingly,
Reminds me sort of 2022. With Trayvon
Right.
Walker, Aiden Hutchinson, Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner. There was talk of Ekwuna maybe going first. It's sort of that similar situation, in my
Right. And a
opinion.
quarterback class that was very much unsettled up until the end. I remember that year, the week of the draft, texting a scout and saying, "Hey, I got to finish my final mock. Like, what do I do with these quarterbacks?" And he's like, "I don't know. I wouldn't touch them in the first round, but they're gonna
Yep.
go. They always go." And
Yep.
of course, that year they didn't, except for Kenny Pickett, who barely, went in the first round, only quarterback in the first 74 picks. So this year is going to be interesting because at least I think we're going to have a couple quarterbacks go in the top 15 to 20 picks. But yeah, we'll have to see how the whole process plays out.
it was funny, Dane. I will revert back to the quarterbacks in a second, but you brought up the 2022 draft, and I only bring this up because I get a lot of complaints from Giant fans about Joe Shane's two picks in that draft, right? Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal. And I tell them, guys, go back and actually look at the draft. You know, Sauce Gardner's off the board. You get past those two guys, spare a couple of receivers. Chris Olave's in that mix, Garrett Wilson. The rest of the first round is not peppered with all these really good players at elite positions. We're going to look back at 2022, I think, and we're going to say that first round was not one of the better first rounds we've had.
Yeah, and I don't think too many people were killing the Giants in the moment for those
No,
picks. I mean, I,
heck
I don't
no.
think. I could with Evan Neal and Thibodeau. I mean, you could nitpick them, and there were things about their profile maybe that gave you a little bit of pause. But I don't think anybody thought they were just bums and said, "Okay, these guys are future busts. These were bad picks." You can understand the thinking of why they made those selections. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and the GM has to be accountable for that. But at the same time, I'm not ready to kill Joe Shane for those picks.
All right, I want to go to the quarterbacks now, Dane. And I like to level set with people here, and you kind of mentioned it in your opening answer. If you were to combine this year's quarterbacks class with last year's quarterbacks class, when does the first quarterback in this year's class go?
For me, Caleb, May, and Daniels, I mean, those are the top three. I don't think any of these quarterbacks come close to the top three. And then it's a matter of, okay, what's quarterback 4, 5, 6, 7 look for you? For me, JJ McCarthy, he was quarterback 4 for me last year. He'd still be quarterback 4 if we combine the two classes. And then I think it's the top quarterback in this class competing with Penix and Nix to be, okay, who's quarterback 5, 6, and 7? And now, obviously, Bo Nix is playing really well right now. We haven't seen much of Michael Penix at all, so that's an unknown at this point. And then this quarterback class, for me, I mean, I have Cam Ward right now at quarterback 1. There's a lot to like about Cam Ward. His elusiveness in the pocket, his ability to sling the ball anywhere he wants on the field, create explosive plays. It's a lot of fun to watch. He's a very entertaining quarterback. But there's a looseness to his game that is what you like about him, but also it's a double-edged sword. That looseness leads to some poor decision making at times, whether that's taking sacks he shouldn't, making throws he shouldn't, decisions that he shouldn't make. And now he's cut down on those compared to what we saw at Washington State. And I think that's just a natural maturity that he has shown. But if I have to bet on any of these quarterbacks in this class right now, middle of November, it would be Cam Ward for me. Now, some teams might prefer Shedeur Sanders. There's other quarterbacks that might be in this class. We'll see what Garrett Nussmeier decides to do after this season out of LSU. Jalen Milroe feels like he is going to come out. At least that's the feedback from Alabama. How will teams look at him. I mean, you have to be kind of all in or not in at all with a quarterback who you're going to really rely on his legs to be a productive NFL pro. So this quarterback class there's a lot up in the air at this point, and we never use the word consensus when we talk about quarterbacks in the draft because teams look at these guys very differently, and that's so true with this class because you look from team to team, evaluator to evaluator. They're going to look at these quarterbacks differently and have them stacked a lot differently.
Yeah, I think John and I have talked about it with Cam Ward. I think he improvises to a fault, and he's not going to be able to do that much improvising on Sundays. He's done the past season, although he's shown great improvement in his game. Let's stick with the quarterbacks. In your top 50, you don't have Carson Beck mentioned in the top 50. You don't even mention him at all. Understandable. Again, John and I have talked the last month about how he's falling down draft boards. But my two-part question, where was Carson Beck rated for you at the start of the season?
He was my top quarterback. And when you watch him last year, you saw a quarterback who was getting better and better and better with each week. And it's like, okay, this guy is continuing to ascend. And as we project him forward, he should continue to get better in his senior year, his final year. Last year was a first-year starter. So now, okay, a full season under his belt. What is he going to look like as a fifth-year guy? And it's been really up and down for him. Now, I give him credit for what he did over the weekend against Tennessee, where coming off some poor performances, he goes out there and has a big-time performance against a really good defense, 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. I think that, when you look at that Georgia offense this year, obviously no Brock Bowers, Lad McConkey, but that offensive line has been a below average unit most of this year. Now they played pretty well against Tennessee, but that's been a big factor here. But I think it's also shown, kind of highlighted that Carson Beck is not really a second reaction quarterback. That's not his strength as a quarterback. He can move a little bit. He's not a bad athlete, but that's where some of the panic decisions come in, is when he has to move from his spot, throw on the move. He can do it, but that's where some of those interceptions come in, some of the overthrows, some of the points in his game that you kind of look at and say, all right, that's going to be a problem at the next level. So I don't know that he's going to have a lot of starter level grades. Maybe some teams will still hold on to that because there's still a lot to like about him. But some of the mistakes that he's shown on film this year are really going to be something that hurts him throughout the process. I think right now we're talking about him as maybe a 3rd round pick, but he still has it's Georgia, so they're going to have a lot of big games here coming up, the regular season and then into the playoffs. Well, he has a chance to kind of change that narrative a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with you about the Georgia offensive line. I mean, they have not played well, and it's not due to lack of talent. They're just not playing well.
No.
But staying on Carson Beck, you say he's a 3rd round pick now, but if the draft was to be held this weekend, do you think there's any chance he would land in the 1st round?
I'd be pretty shocked. I mean, and that's feedback from scouts, and then also just the body of work of his game. Like what is about his game that I think that you can point to? If I'm selling Carson Beck in a war room to my GM, what am I really going to hit on over everything else to say, hey, this is why we should take him with the 25th pick or whatever it is in the 1st round? I don't know that I would have trouble selling him. I can sell that he's a good quarterback, but I would have a hard time selling that he is a guy worthy of drafting in the 1st round. Because if you're drafting him in the 1st round, you're telling that, you're saying that, hey, he's a guy that's not only going to be a starter for us, he's going to help us compete for the division, for the playoffs and beyond. And I just can't get there with Carson Beck with what he's put on film this year. Too many turnover worthy plays. Not enough ability to improvise and make things happen when the structure of the play falls apart. Because we know that's in the NFL, that's what a lot of it is. When things fall apart, things don't go according to plan. You have to have a plan B, be a problem solver. You look at the first 3 quarterbacks that were drafted last year, 1, 2, 3, Caleb, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, all 3 were exceptional with the problem solving when things didn't go according to plan. And I think that's where Carson Beck, there's some questions about, all right, does he have enough of what it takes to be the guy at the next level? I think he could start. I think he could do some things that, will hold up at the next level. But to draft him in the first round, I think that's a tough sell.
Last one on the quarterbacks from me, Dane. You have Jalen Milroe and Shador Sanders back to back at 22
Yeah.
and 23 on your top 50. You guys go check out Dane's top 50, by the way, on The Athletic. How much of Sanders' ranking has to do with everything that goes along with him as a player? You know, his dad, they've talked about trying to direct where he gets picked. You know, Milroe, on the other hand, I think he's squeaky clean from like a leadership guy perspective, right? So if you like took Milroe's like personality and all that and put it with Shador's throwing ability, or we talk about a top 10 player, how did you kind of figure out where to place Shador Sanders in your rankings?
So, okay, for me, and look, I'll start off by saying I really wish I would not include quarterbacks on a top 50 because it's so
It's
hard.
hard.
It's such a different weighted position compared to everything else. So it's like it's tough to accurately put a quarterback in a top 50 when you have to look at them so differently than every other position. I like Shador Sanders. I think some people are looking at him at further down. He's in the mid 20s for me and saying, "Oh, you obviously hate the guy." No, I don't know. If I hated him, he wouldn't be in my top 50. I like Shador Sanders. I think when you look at the poise, the accuracy, the toughness, those are three strong things that I can sell to my GM about Shador Sanders and why I think it could work at the next level. My concerns with Shador come with some of his play style. And because honestly, and to answer your question specifically, I don't know enough about Shador, the person, to.
And neither do I.
Yes, right. There's a lot of conjecture, and that's only going to heat up as we get further into the process. But I don't know enough about him to drop him necessarily because of some of these concerns. Now, they do exist. These are things. The word baggage comes up when you talk to scouts about Shador Sanders. But I personally don't know enough about that baggage to drop him down. This is based purely on tape at this point.
Got it.
While I like Shador Sanders, my concerns with him come with some of the play style where, you watch him and he is consistently drifting, backpedaling. The inconsistencies managing the pocket are kind of the big issues with me. And yeah, the offensive line gets brought up a lot when you talk about Colorado. A lot of these sacks are on the quarterback because he is taking himself instead of climbing the pocket and moving around. He is
Runs backwards all the time.
exactly. He's putting him when you're setting up shop 11 yards behind the line of scrimmage. There's nothing your tackle can do. I mean, that's just, and you throw on the Kansas State tape and you see him do that more than a few times. So I like Shador Sanders as a quarterback. I think a lot of what he has will work at the next level, but some of the play style concerns worry me, and it's because he doesn't have A++ physical skill set in terms of size, in terms of arm strength. He has a good arm, just not an elite arm. He has okay size. He's 6'1", probably going to be around 210, but not great size. And then as an athlete, he's a good athlete, but not a Jalen Milroe athlete. So when you're not top tier in some of those areas, I'm not saying he can't make it work, but until the pocket movements and pocket management, negotiating that pass rush, until that improves, I'm going to have some concerns about how that's going to work, especially in the NFL when everything just gets so much faster, especially compared to what he's playing in the Big 12.
You made it easy for me to segue into my next question, and it's about Shador Sanders' teammate, Travis Hunter. I got a little bit of Travis Hunter fatigue. It's Travis Hunter 24/7. He is your number one prospect. Is he your number one prospect because you believe he is a generational talent, a can't miss prospect? Is he that much far ahead of everyone else in this class? Or is it that he's just the best prospect in sort of a muddled class, if you will?
Yeah, like I don't think I would put him in the same class as like say a Myles Garrett, who was clear. I mean, think about some of the quarterbacks in that class, and it was just kind of always, well, Myles Garrett's going one because he's just that much better than everybody else. I wouldn't put him in that class. So I think it's a little bit of both of what you're describing because he is just a phenomenal athlete and he is that good. But also part of it is this is a top 10 where there's a lot to like, but it's hard to have conviction on a lot of these guys. Will Johnson's my number 2 player, a corner from Michigan, who I really, really like, but he's not a can't miss guy by any means. all the pass rushers that are in the top 10 conversation, at least, Abdul Carter and Mikael Williams, James Pierce, like these guys all have warts that you could point to and say, well, that's a reason to be a little bit concerned. So Travis Hunter, when I did my top 50, one Travis Hunter at 1 was the easiest pick that I had, and the rest were a little bit tougher. He is the best player in this draft, and I think if he strictly played receiver, I don't know that it would be as easy. I think as a corner, he's clearly number 1, and then you sprinkle in some offensive plays. That's what makes him so special and different. Now, if he went to the NFL and said, "I only want to play receiver," then I don't. Maybe it's not as clear cut that he's number 1, because I think he's still a top 7 player in this draft, but maybe not as clear cut as if he was going to play corner with a little bit of offense worked in there.
Dane, it's funny you bring that up, as I was looking at some of the captions on your top 50. And for your second overall player, and this is not a criticism, it's just a fact based on the classes. Will Johnson, you mentioned it. He goes, has missed multiple games this season due to shoulder injuries, and his 2024 tape has had more volatility than you would want to see. Abdul Carter, great athletic traits, very much a work in progress as a pass rusher. These are your second and third ranked players in the class. And I guess the reason I kind of phrase it this way is that I asked these with the quarterback. So if you look at the position group this year, you could either put Hunter in or out of it, however you want to handle this. How would you compare this to last year's class when you're looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors and Joe Alt? These guys at premium positions that maybe don't have as many warts as some of the guys in this class. How would you kind of insert this year's class into last year's group to give fans kind of a baseline way to think about them?
Yeah, I think if you combine the classes of my top 9, 7 would be from last year's class and 2 would be in this year's class. So, I mean, Caleb, Marvin Harrison Jr., Neighbors, those are my top 3 guys last year. I mean, you remember how Neighbors was kind of my guy. If he in most classes, Malik Neighbors would have been easy my number 1 overall player. Last year, he just happened to be in a class with Caleb and Marvin Harrison Jr., so he was number 3.
Yeah.
Drake May was number 4. Joe Alt was number 5. I think all 5 of those guys would clearly be number 1 ahead of anybody in this class. And then I put Travis Hunter probably next, and then Roma Dunze, Brock Bowers, Jaden Daniels. Obviously, Daniels has outplayed where I had him at 7 or whatever. And then that's where you start talking about maybe Will Johnson at that point. So, it's a class where I don't want to totally downplay it and say there's not talent. There's clearly talent in this year's top 10. But I think it is a little bit tougher to have all the way in 100% conviction, at least at this point in the process, about most of these guys, because like Abdul Carter, he's a little bit undersized. He's still learning how to play the position. He was a stand-up linebacker most of his career, transitioned to more of an edge rusher this year. Speed is phenomenal. I mean, this guy as an athlete is really impressive. But there's more to playing the position than just having speed. So and you look at the rest of the top 10 of this year, whether you're talking is there any offensive linemen in this year's top 10? I think it's tough. The receivers, T-Mac from Arizona is a really good player, but he's probably a 4-5 athlete, not a polished route runner. So there's you can poke holes in all of these guys more so than I think the top classes in recent years.
Stay on the edge rusher theme. Jalen Walker is one of my favorite players in this class. I watched him last year as a rotational guy, and you could see that he had something going on. You think he's going to be drafted as an edge rusher or a traditional linebacker, but which is kind of seemed to be lost in this day and age in the NFL, because this guy, as far as I'm concerned, he's a 3-down player, whether it's playing in space, dropping in the coverage, or rushing up the field.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree. I mean, he is a top 10 player in this draft. And, you watch him against Tennessee, and over the weekend, he had a grand total of 8 pass rush snaps where, so he's not really asked to do it enough. But when he is able to do it, he's able to be disruptive. So I think the versatility that he brings as a stand-up player who can drop in coverage, he can play the run, he can get after the quarterback. That versatility is something that a defensive coordinator will always have in their back pocket, where we can play around with him. I think obviously Micah Parsons is the player you point to as that college linebacker who turned into more of an edge rusher, more of a Let's just make him the versatile part of our front seven and let him wreak havoc. Jalen Walker has a little bit of that to him because of that versatility and because he is so good getting after the quarterback. So I agree. His pass rush is what he does best. So I don't know that I want to completely take away some of that versatility, but I want him getting after the quarterback more than anything else that he's doing on the field because that's what he does best. So I think it'll be interesting as we go through the process and different teams look at him and they take a look at their scheme and how do they fit him best. But I think when it's all said and done, he's clearly one of the top 10 players in this class.
You mentioned the offensive tackles, Dane, and I think coming into this class in the offseason, looking at last year, I think we thought you could have a couple top 10 offensive tackles in this class, but it hasn't really played out that way. Will Campbell, he's been a little inconsistent. I know some people, and Tony wanted to ask you about this, so I'll kind of preempt him here. Maybe think he can slide into guard. Kelvin Banks had some issues with some speed rushers this year. Is he going to be a guard? How do you think the league is looking at this offensive tackle class, and how do you see it in terms of where the guys might go and how many of these guys might actually even stick at offensive tackle?
We were spoiled last year, right? With all these offensive tackles. If Amarius Mims were in this draft class, he'd go top 5. A guy with that type of those traits and that ability. This year, I like Will Campbell a lot. I don't know anybody that doesn't like Will Campbell. But is he a true top 10 left tackle? Some teams will, I think, have him inside as a guard or a center. Talking to scouts, they asking, what is his arm length going to be? They say right at 33 or maybe a little bit below. And so that'll be an issue for some teams when, they have strict thresholds for what they want for their length of their offensive tackles. But, Will Campbell, we have to remember too, is 20 years old. He started right away at left tackle as a true freshman for LSU. He's been doing it the last 3 years. His recovery balance is really impressive. Reminds me a little bit of Jake Matthews in terms of the body type and the fluidity that he brings. But he's also a stronger version. He's also a better finisher than what we've seen from Jake Matthews. So, it hasn't been all perfect. You watch him against Ole Miss. You watch him against Landon Jackson got him, or the Arkansas defensive end got him a few times. The great Texas A&M defensive line gave that unit trouble. So Will Campbell, to me, is still the best offensive lineman that I have watched in this class so far. But it's hard to say with conviction that he's a true top 10 guy compared to some of the tackles we've seen go early in recent years.
Draft season is presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at moodys.com.
Yeah, Kyle Kennard also had a field day on him in that South Carolina game. So let me ask you, your concern about Will Campbell at tackle is specifically arm
length. I mean, that's part of it. I don't think that, you don't watch the tape and it just is obvious where, teams are winning with length. I mean, we saw it when I was watching and studying Will Campbell over the summer. Dallas Turner on the Alabama tape would get him a few times. He can do a better job compensating for that lack of length. His anchor at times, because he is a taller guy, even though the arm length isn't great, he is over 6'6", and sometimes he gets a little upright. That anchor will be tested by power. There's a little bit of stiffness in his lower half, and you see that against inside moves. More flags than you want to see for a guy being talked about as a top half of round 1 player. So, I mean, again, he's a good example of the players in this class where you can see the talent. You can see how there's a path to him being a really good NFL starter. But right now, you can poke holes in his game.
Let me flip that around. Josh Connerly of Oregon, Kelvin Banks of Texas. Both guys are going to be under 6'4". Both guys have shown a lot of ability at left tackle, a lot of ability, blocking in motion on the second level, even the third level. What happens if either of those guys come in with massive arm lengths, 34 and a half, something like that? You think they're going to get consideration at left tackle?
For me, Kelvin Banks is the way he plays. His play style is just, he looks like a guard to me. He's a good player. But he's on the ground too much. He would throw on the Michigan tape. He's on the ground on the Georgia tape. He's on the ground too much. But with Josh Connerly, I think because he has the feet to be outside at left tackle. And the hands are all over the place, needs to continue getting stronger. But when you have the feet that he has, and then his recovery movements are basically a saving grace because he will misfire his hands. He will be, trying to play catch up, but his recovery steps, his recovery body control are exceptional. And that's what really separates him from some of these other guys. So he's, a third year junior. He's still young, still learning, still growing, but he has some tools that you can point to and say, all right, that will work at the next level and help him survive as the rest hopefully catches up when our guys can coach him up. So I think Connor, and that's why Connerly is going to be in that first round discussion because of that recovery balance, that athleticism. And as long as you believe he's coachable, team was going to kind of roll the dice on that because we know there's a lot of teams, 32 of them, that need offensive line depth and help. And Connerly is one of the few in this class that has true left tackle feet and recovery skills.
Dan, you went old school. You got a running back at number 6, and I love it. It's great. And I do think NFL teams, while the salaries of the running backs are on skyrocketing, I think they're understanding the importance of a good running game, especially with all these shell defenses, 2 safeties deep. You got to run power. You got to be able to run the ball consistently. We know how good Genty is. He's phenomenal. The rest of this class, though, it seems like we're going to have a pretty good number of second-round picks, while last year we were struggling to find 1 second-round pick in the draft class. I feel like this is almost like a renaissance running back draft class here with guys with some different styles, too, that could step in and be 15, 17 carry-a-game guys at the pro level.
Yeah, no doubt. A running back will unquestionably be one of the strengths of this draft class. And Genty is the only one that I feel confident saying will be a first-round pick. But then, to your point, once we get to the second round, day 2, and then because there's so many of these guys, just in terms of volume,
Right.
there will be good running backs in rounds 3, 4, and probably into round 5, because there's only so many teams that are going to be drafting a running back that early. Caleb Johnson from Iowa, what he's done this year, just the size, the speed, the forward lean, the pad level, the patience, the vision. I mean, he has a lot of what teams are looking for in a one cut, get north type of runner. Omarion Hampton, with no more Drake May there, everyone knows, all right, Hampton's kind of the focal point of that offense, yet he still is able to be productive. And he's really good without the ball in his hands. So blocking, you can keep him on the field on any down. Both of Ohio State's guys with Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, these guys are pros. And I think the stats aren't going to look great for those guys this year because they're sharing carries. And we know that, the receivers at Ohio State are obviously going to cut into that as well. But it's them joining up this year, I think, has really helped them, both of them, because it pushes each other. It helps keep them fresh. And, they're going to go to the NFL with plenty of tread left on the tires. Dylan Sampson's been a lot of fun this year for Tennessee. I mean, we could really spend the whole episode talking about just running backs and all of the guys that will be in this class and guys that even if they're not running back 1 on your depth chart, they're going to be really valuable running back 2s or 3s and guys that are going to be at least influence how you game plan on Sundays.
All right, Tony, I'm going to step aside here, and I'm going to let you roll through some of the individual players you want to hit on. The floor is yours.
Well, I'm going to go to an offensive position where there's not a lot of depth. Tight end. You've got Colston Loveland at 13, and then double that, you got Tyler Warren at 26. You think Colston Loveland is fast enough to be a top 20 pick?
Oh yeah, I think that's why he will be a top 20 pick is because of his speed. You watch him. He's basically a wide receiver for Michigan. I mean, that's how they use him, and that's smart. I mean, I think there are teams that will write up Colston Loveland as a wide receiver because he is tall, lean, and fast. And as a blocker, he's not going to give you a ton. Now he's different than Brock Bowers. Bowers, I think, what we're seeing from him for the Raiders on Sundays matches exactly what we thought he would be. Loveland's not quite on that level, but he is a more fluid, kind of like Dalton Kincaid, another guy who coming out of college was an exceptional receiver, not going to give you a ton as a blocker, still went first round. And I think Loveland can be that type of player, and especially in this draft class, end up in the top 20. Now, Tyler Warren, he gives you a little bit more of that traditional tight end And he's going to do some really athletic stuff at the combine for a guy that, is 255 pounds. Um, Watching him this year, the versatility that he's showing as a Wildcat quarterback, because he was a quarterback in high school, returning the quarterback as a Wildcat guy, taking handoffs, he's throwing the ball. His ability, he's well built, he's strong, he's got really good acceleration into his routes, he's fluid. And his ability to the hand-eye coordination at the catch point is really impressive to snatch the football, put it away. I'll bet you at the end of this year, he's going to have more one-handed grabs than he will have drops on his film. I mean, he's that type of receiver. So now, is he the best blocker? No. I mean, he is more of that traditional blocker, but in the run game, it's kind of up and down for him. So, like a lot of tight ends going to the NFL, he can line up in line, but I don't know that he's that true combination guy. You're drafting him early in the top 40 because of what he gives you in the passing game. So, maybe similar to, like Sam Laporta was kind of that way, where you're drafting him for what he can do as a receiver. And, you try to coach him up as a blocker. Hopefully he gets better and better in that area. But, Tyler Warren, my comp for him was a Tyler Eifert, who ended up going in the first round. A guy that could, you draft to help you in the passing game. But I think your overall point is spot on. The tight end position this year, you've got these guys at the top, and then I think it'll be interesting if those guys are tight end 1 and 2. Who's tight end 3? Is it going to be first of all, what juniors are coming out? The guy like Mason Taylor from LSU, he made my top 50. I think he's just so useful and valuable, everything that he does. Gadsden from Syracuse. Does Fannin from Bowling Green come out? I'm a big fan of Terrence Ferguson from Oregon and everything that he brings. So this is a tight end class that there's 2 guys at the top, and then there's some interesting players that might have a chance to sneak into the top 100, but more the bulk of the tight ends we drafted on day 3.
You got Evan Stewart, the receiver from Oregon, by way of Texas A&M at number 36. And when Evan Stewart is on, wow! I mean,
Yep.
he is sometimes you can't defend him. The production is not there, though. It doesn't stand out the way they run that offense, and Dylan Gabriel spreads the ball around. What do you think the upside? And this is kind of subjective question, as they are. But what is the upside for Evan Stewart? I mean, could he be one of those guys that, in the weeks leading up to the draft, you just hear that teams love and he ends up as a top 25 pick?
Yeah, and I think that Evan Stewart could really benefit from a wide receiver class that's a little bit unsettled in the top 5, because we saw how many 10 receivers go in the top 40 last year. We know teams want to get more explosive at wide receiver. T-Mac, Luther Burden, those guys say they're 1 and 2. Let's say Travis Hunter's a corner. So who's wide receiver 3? I think that'll be an interesting competition, between Emeka Ibuka from Ohio State. He's going to be in that mix. The Stanford kid, Elik Ayomanor, who the Stanford coaches think is going back, but we'll have to see how that plays out. Evan Stewart's going to be right up there as well because of the ability to get vertical and win deep. We saw it on the Ohio State tape. But to your point, I think you're absolutely right. For a guy that is as athletic and talented as he is, why does he have 5 games of 20 yards or less and only 2 games of 100 yards or more this year? Why isn't the production more, especially with Tez Johnson down, the Oregon's number 1 receiver? And it's not like you have a bad offense. You have literally a Heisman contender at quarterback. So why isn't the production more from Evan Stewart? That's something that I think teams will have to kind of reconcile as they go through this process. Is all right, you're buying low on a player who's about to blow up because he grows and he's a true junior, still young. Or is there, are there some issues in his game that maybe we need to pay more attention to? But I think just the fact that he can win vertically, that's going to help him throughout the process and going to give him a chance to be a top 3 or 4 receiver this year.
Go to the defensive side of the ball. Nick Emanawari of South Carolina. John and I have talked about him a couple times this season. I mean, he is a linebacker size safety, but he's got terrific ball skills. The ball production is there. He's got 2 TDs this year. But the question is, I mean, is he a true, center fielder? Is he just a traditional strong safety? Is he his own safety? Do you think teams are looking at him or would look at him as a safety or as maybe a one gap linebacker?
I mean, first, how much fun is that to watch that South Carolina defense? I mean, all the guys they have on the defensive line,
Yep.
and then the corner number three, Fortune, is a lot of fun. And then yeah, Minority, who he's an impressive size speed athlete. Like you said, he looks like a linebacker, but he's got the speed of a corner. I mean, he moves really well. So that range, I think. I mean, yeah, you want him. Can he be a big nickel for a team where he's going to walk up close to the line of scrimmage, going to be able to hold up, dropping in the coverage, but he's going to string out runs. He's going to be able to clean up at the second level. I think teams are going to look at him all a little bit differently based on their scheme and how they want to showcase his talent because he is such a unique player. All I know is the talent's there. And so I had to include him in my top 50. But yeah, that South Carolina defense is a ton of fun. I mean, you referenced Kyle Kennard earlier. TJ Sanders has at the defensive tackle has been playing outstanding. Tonka Hemingway is a draftable player. So yeah, that South Carolina defense is a joy to watch.
And the pitch transfer, PJ Jules, has been injured, hasn't played for almost a
Yeah.
month now. Let's go to Ohio State. You got Jack Sawyer at number 43 and JT Tuimaola at 24. When I look at these guys this year, I think they were better players in 2023. I know the lore of the NIL brought them back to Ohio State, but in my opinion, watching these guys this year, I think they've actually hurt their draft stock. Just want to know your opinion on that.
Yeah, the production hasn't been overly impressive, and this is a team. We saw it watching the Oregon tape. They want to win with their front four, and let their guys cover. And we saw that Dylan Gabriel, when the pass rush wasn't able to get there quick enough, Dylan Gabriel was able to pick them apart. And I think both these guys are going to be solid NFL pros, but are they? Like okay, Tuimalu, his tape is good, but there's not a lot of great on the tape, and that's okay. I mean, not every prospect is a true top 10 guy. I think that he's competitive, he's skilled, and it's very telling that no matter what tape you watch, Tuimalu seeing more four hands and chips and seeing a lot more doubles than anybody else on that defensive line. And it's a pretty talented Ohio State defensive line, but it's number 44 who the offense is paying most attention to. So I think that is very telling. Jack Sawyer he's a good player. It's just I don't think he has enough quick wins in him where if you give him enough time, he will power through and get there and affect the quarterback, but he doesn't have that speed to consistently win around the corner or defeat blocks with just athletic skill. But man, his motor is nonstop, and he's just another guy I want on my defensive line. I don't want to have to draft him in the first round, top 40, but I want to draft somewhere on day 2. I'd be happy to draft him and add him my defensive line rotation. But I think, compared to how they were ranked as high school recruits and maybe how they're talked about sometimes, I could understand how you would think that way.
Last two questions from me, and these are both guys that you mentioned that are not in your top 50. Prince Human I figured this out last week. Prince Human Ellen from Mississippi by way of Florida. I mean, when he's on, he's unstoppable. He looks like a top 32 pick. Is it character, consistency? What are the reasons why he's not in your top 50?
Yeah, I mean, it's can he do enough against the run? I mean, we know what he can do with that initial quickness when he times up the snap and that burst, and his ability to attack the outside edges is outstanding. I think he's doing a better job this year of using his hands to pry open that corner, that closing burst to the quarterback, flatten finish. It's really impressive. But does he have enough where you're going to trust him as a full-time edge defender, stopping the run? I think that's where kind of the questions come in. I think he's worked himself into that top 75 mix where, he was a guy I absolutely considered for my top 50. But some of the concerns in the run game were where I left him out. But I think he has shown enough improvements this year where he's at least gonna be in that conversation.
Last question. Benjamin Morrison, cornerback from Notre Dame, out of your top 50. Hurt the hip early on. He's out for the season. didn't really play that spectacularly early on. Is it just the hip, or is it also a Carson Beck type of situation where you expected him to improve on 2023, and in the games that he played this season, he didn't show it?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think if he were fully healthy, he would have been probably somewhere late 30s, early 40s for me. Because he's a good player. He's patient and balanced in coverage. He technically he's very good. Then also he's very intelligent, and he's not a bad athlete. He's a good athlete, just maybe not an elite one for the position. My big issue with Benjamin Morrison was just the play strength. Too many times where he's getting out muscled when he's trying to press. Blockers completely overwhelming him. He that the lack of play strength really showed up, in my opinion, earlier this season. And then you throw in the injury, obviously. The hips are kind of important for anybody on the football field, but especially a corner who you want to be able to turn and pivot and make these sudden movements. And so, if fully healthy, he would have made my top 50 somewhere in that, probably in the 40s. But with the injury, it's kind of up in the air, and it's a tough part about injuries this time of year. You're just not sure what is the long term implications. Like Josh Simmons from the left tackle from Ohio State, another one of these guys with the patella, with the knee. You're just not sure. Okay, how serious is this going to be long term? Could this, Harold Perkins from LSU with the ACL? Does the injury factor into their decision to maybe come back for another year, or are they just gonna, take their chances in the NFL? So yeah, the serious injuries in November this time of year can be really tough when you try to project these guys.
Final one for me, Dane, and this is a two-parter, so I apologize. We've talked about two corners here. You guys talked about the Michigan corner. You talked about Travis Hunter. Otherwise, how deep is that class? How does it look? And then is this finally the resurgent defensive tackle class that we've been waiting for? It's been a bunch of years since we've had a good defensive tackle class. This seems like it could be one.
Yeah, I mean the corner class is okay. I mean, I think I only have four in my top 50, which is a pretty low number. We obviously, speaking of season-ending injuries, Siobhan Ravel from East Carolina, who had a really good chance to be a first-round pick before the injury, and he still might. Now that he has the ACL, it sounds like he's probably going to be part of this draft class. We'll have to kind of see how that plays out. I'm a big fan of Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, but he's been hurt most of this season. That's kind of hurt him. Overall, this corner class is a little bit light, and I think, again, only four in my top 50 kind of represents that. But I do think that could end up pushing up some of the guys that maybe they're missing one thing about their profile. Maybe they're a little bit too small. Maybe they don't have the arm length. A great example is Jedi Barron from Texas, who has under 30-inch arms, and that's going to be an issue. Some teams are going to be out on Barron because they need at least 31 inches or longer for their arm length. The lack of arm length is going to be an issue, but if the lack of corner depth, especially in the top 50, top 60, could end up helping a really good player, because the football IQ, his read react is awesome. Big fan of Barron. It's just the lack of length is going to hurt him. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Defensive tackle. Is this a resurgence of the
Yeah.
defensive
Oh, yeah.
tackles for the first time in a few years?
I mean, defensive line as a whole, the edge rushers, and then at defensive tackle, it's going to be a really good group. I mean, the seniors too, with Tyleik Williams and the two guys from Texas A&M, Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, even a guy like Alfred Collins from Texas, who came back for his fifth year and is playing at a really high level, has turned himself into an early round pick, day two pick type of guy. Mason Graham from Michigan is going to be probably a top 10 player. You hate using the word safe in any draft about a prospect, but he seems like one of the safer players in this draft. Hard to see him not working out. Derek Harmon from Oregon's been a big riser this year with the disruption that he brings. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, as long as he continues to mature and teams are confident about his maturity, he's got the goods where he's going to be in that first round discussion. I mean, we could talk about 5, 6, 7 more guys at defensive tackle that have a chance to be top 75 picks and be guys that are going to influence how they are played as rookies in the NFL. So this is a really good defensive line class.
Dane, always an absolute pleasure talking to you, my friend. Tell the folks where they can find all your fantastic work. As some NFL fan base is already there, but the whole
Hmm.
world kind of slowly gets into Dane Brugler season.
Yeah, it's everything's on the Athletic, and you can find all that on Twitter at DP Brugler. We've getting almost a mock draft season, and then of
Oh
course
God,
eventually the Beast coming out in April, which I know a lot of people love, and so happy to bring that back again another year.
have they asked you to do a mock draft already? Please tell me no.
Oh, of course. Yeah. No, but my rule is we have to at least get past Thanksgiving. Once we get past Thanksgiving, all right, then we can start talking about mock drafts because at that point, there's enough teams that are absolutely out of it. And we've seen the players to know, okay, there's a good chance these guys are going here. But yeah, at least let us get past Thanksgiving before we really dive into that.
And by the way, it's even tougher now with all these playoff games. Like you have like a half a season that's
Yeah.
going to take place from December to January with so many of these guys with 12 teams in the playoffs. I mean, it's going to be a whole new set of information where guys are going to move them like crazy, I think, late in the process this year.
All right, if Michael Penix doesn't have his 430-yard performance against Texas in the semifinals last year, does he still go in the top 10? Who knows, And so I think, your point's absolutely right. And we kind of mentioned that with Carson Beck. There's going to be plenty of high leverage games coming up for Georgia and the rest of these teams that could change the way we look at these players. Colorado's got a good chance to sneak in as the Big 12 champs. And if they do, they have a first round bye, and it'd be a lot of fun. I think that's one of the criticisms of Shador too is, the two best defenses on that schedule are Kansas State, Nebraska, 2 losses. Okay, well, how would he look against a Georgia defense, an Ohio State defense, one of these teams, which is just it's a great thing for evaluators, and also a great opportunity for some of these players. If Shador goes out there and has a career game, kind of like CJ Stroud did against Georgia in the playoffs a couple years ago, all of a sudden Shador is rocketing up how teams are talking about him. So plenty of opportunity still left for teams or for prospects to make a statement.
Dane, this is awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Anytime. Thanks, guys.
Draft season is a proud partner of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risks into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. Great stuff from Dane Brugler. Love to have him on. Just first of all, a great human being, super nice guy. And Tony is someone that is knee deep in this as you are. I'm sure when you talk to somebody else, you can tell that they are also knee deep in it. And it's fun to kind of share opinions with another guy who's living this life, 24/7, 365 like you are.
Well, like you said, 24/7, 365, because what's going to happen is in a couple of months, people go from the Super Bowl to the draft. But
And they parachute
myself,
in with all their expert opinions, even though
exactly.
they haven't watched
Myself,
anything.
Dane Brugler, this is, I'm sure if you ask Dane, he'll tell you, he starts hitting the tape hard for the following year's draft 2 weeks after the existing draft is over. So as I do. So yeah, it's always good to get other perspectives, and especially when you agree on things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm surprised you guys just didn't bask in your adoration for Abdul Carter for longer during that segment. I was waiting for that, Tony. I'm a little disappointed. I'm not going to lie.
Well, it is what it is, right?
All right. We saved this for last because we wanted to get Dane in. He was the headliner today. Some games in college football wasn't the best college football weekend, Tony. We didn't have some of those marquee games that we've had in games in weeks past, but we did have some and it mirrored some of the guys we talked about in our interview with Dane. So let's start off, and I'm going to let you kind of take it just game by game. We'll start with Texas and Arkansas.
Yeah, it was the big matchup there was Kelvin Banks versus Landon Johnson. I think early on, if you watched that game,
Jackson,
Banks did
Landon
a good
Jackson.
job. I'm sorry,
Landon Jackson. You said Landon Johnson.
Landon Jackson. I
Yes,
apologize.
that's okay.
I think if you watch that game early on, Banks had his way with Jackson. Jackson did get a sack later in the game, but it was more a good play by him rather than a great pass rush because he stayed with it, found the quarterback, and just changed direction. But Banks showed a lot of ability in pass protection, and it's going to be interesting. I still have Banks as a guard, but I can see with those pass protection skills, some team liking him at left tackle. Landon Jackson, he's not a great athlete. He's not very explosive, but he's very workmanlike. We talked about Jahdae Barron, and Dane said that he's going to be knocked down because his arm length isn't 30 inches. It isn't 30 inches. It's 29. It was measured last spring at 29 and 7/8 inches. So he's an eighth under that 30 inch mark, but he was phenomenal. 7 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, intercepted 1 pass, which Texas converted, broke up another one. I think Barron is going to be a solid second-round pick and will be a terrific linebacker, terrific nickelback at the next level. He's a guy that's shown consistent improvement in his game the past 3 years.
It's funny. You asked Dane about Carson Beck, and I was going to follow up, but we were running out of time. I wanted to make sure we got in all the guys we wanted to get in. I feel like Quinn Ewers is kind of the same guy, right? Like both guys, I think most people, along with Shedeur, they were the top 3 quarterbacks heading into the year, right, in terms of rankings, and neither one of those guys were in his top 50. And like he said, right now, Carson Beck, and I think yours is probably in the same situation. You're looking at third-round picks for these 2 guys.
The thing about Ewers is this. People outside the scouting community had Ewers ranked very high. I mean, we're in New York. We heard since the beginning, on your top 10 pick to the New York Giants. But if you talk to people in the scouting community over the summer, before the season began, they looked at Ewers as a day 2, even a third-round pick. So I think from that perspective, it's much more surprising the downfall we've seen thus far from Carson Beck versus.
So Beck was thought of much more highly than Ewers was over the summer from guys you talked to.
In the scouting community, no doubt about it.
Got it. All right, let's go to Utah, Colorado. We talked about Shedeur Sanders, and what do you think of him and Travis Hunter in this game?
I think Shedeur Sanders, his game is kind of leveled off. I'm seeing better catches than throws in the passing game. And what I mean by that is the ball is going up. The receiver's got to get vertical. The receiver's got to fight to come away with the pass rather than spot on, accurate, great pass placement.
And that is what Travis Hunter's great at, by the way. He's so good at those contested balls.
But the thing is, it's not just Travis Hunter. Will Shepard, the transfer from Vanderbilt, has played well all season, had a couple of phenomenal receptions during that game. LeJontay Webster, he's more of the speedster. But I think with Sanders, I don't know if he's doing too much, if he's getting beat up a little bit, but I see better catches than I see passes, which is something to keep an eye on. Travis Hunter, I mean, I like him. I don't absolutely love him, as other people talked about. And you could tell, with our conversation with Dane, he thinks he's a really good player, but he's not a generational type talent. I will say this. Everybody's, Travis Hunter's doing the Heisman pose in that game. Everybody's talking about Heisman. I'm going with Ashton Genty, because if you take Travis Hunter off of Colorado, they're still a very good team. They got good. Their defense is starting to kick it into gear because they've got some good defensive linemen. And the Kyle Hill Green, the linebackers played very well. Went from Michigan to Charlotte, found a home at Colorado. Even, some of those other receivers, granted it's not Travis Hunter, but they keep them in the game. You take Ashton Genty off of Boise State, I don't think Boise State's a 500 team.
You kind of referenced this with Dane a little bit. I just want to do a quick follow-up. What are you hearing about what Travis Hunter is going to run in the 40?
I'd be surprised if he gets below 4.45. He's more of a 4.45 to 4.5 guy, maybe with some training.
Which by the way, if he ends up running a 4.46 or something, that's fine. No one's going to ding him for that, I don't think.
No, you're absolutely right. But again, he's not going to be 6 foot tall.
And really? You think he's under 6 foot? Because he plays bigger. He plays bigger than that height when you watch him.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the vertical jump is incredible. You saw that Saturday in the game when he came away with the reception. He can vertical. Give me a second here.
Yeah.
He was by scouts in the offseason. He was right about 6 foot tall, 5'11" and change.
Okay.
So I mean, if you're looking at the cornerback position, he's got to be 6 foot tall. The hands are 8.5 inches. The estimated 40 time is 4.52. So, listen, this is not Travis Hunter. Hey, I'm not hating on Travis Hunter. He's really good. I just don't think he's the spectacular, can't miss prospect. Send it in. He's the Heisman Trophy winner. No, I think there are guys who are just as good, and a guy like Ashton Genty who, does it by himself every week.
Yeah, and I think both of us think when all is said and done, he's going to be a top 5 pick easy, maybe top 3 in this year's draft class. But again, that's why you asked me the question, is this top 3 because he's just the best of what we got, or is he a top 3 because, no, this is Marvin Harrison Jr., this is Malik Neighbors, that type of top 3 talent. All right, let's go to Nebraska USC, Tony. What you see in that game that you like?
Real good game. I mean, Ty Robinson is a guy that we've spoken about a couple times on this podcast. finished the game with 1 sack, tackle for loss, forced a fumble, quarterback hurry, had constant pressure, constantly behind the line of scrimmage. He's quick, he's explosive, he's long. He's a guy that got late round grades coming into the season. He's going to go day 2. Nebraska lines him up all over the field, puts him at nose tackle, puts him at defensive end, puts him at the 5-tech, and he consistently gets the job done. Just altered a lot of plays, even though Nebraska lost that game. Nash Huckmacher, who's more of a gap occupier at nose tackle.
That is one of the best nose tackle names I've ever heard. Like if your name is Nash Huckmacher, you better be a nose tackle or a guard or something like that. Like you aren't playing wide receiver.
Quick, explosive first step, had a play tackle for a loss, which stopped a USC drive. And Jonah Monheim, their USC center, who was the left tackle last year, he's got to get stronger. I mean, he's shown some good things at center, and this is a year where the center position is wide open. It's not going to be a good crop in the draft. Monheim has had his moments, but I don't think he's done enough to be anything other than a very late round pick.
Finally, SEC matchup, Tony, South Carolina and Missouri.
Yeah, this was a good game. I mean, this is a game that went down to the end. Kyle Kennard was very quiet until late in the game. He had a sack in the final drive, which kind of sealed the win for Missouri. But keep an eye on Missouri's right tackle, Armand Membo. I've mentioned him a couple times. He projects to be a zone blocking guard because he's only 6'3", but he's quick. He moves well. He's strong at the point. He angers in pass protection, but he can also get out on the second level. And this is a guy who, if you need a versatile interior type guy that can play in multiple systems, power gap as well as a zone blocking system, you're going to look at Membo probably starting in round 3.
Tony, always fun to talk to you, my friend. I'll talk to you next week. Actually, next week, I believe it's Thanksgiving, so I think we were going to take a pass. We'll see how that goes. It's a tight week for all of us. Unfortunately, with the Giants playing on Thanksgiving, Tony, at the Dallas Cowboys, my wife is thrilled that she has to do like a solo Thanksgiving with me on Friday, which means a lot of extra work for her. I'm very thankful for it, but she's not thrilled. So we might skip draft season next week. And in case we do, we'll be back with you in December. And then at that point, we're getting into conference championship games, Tony, and then we're getting into the playoffs. So, sometimes in December, we've had some years where there's not a ton to talk about. That will not be the case this year. There's going to be games all over the place. It's going to be a lot of fun.
No, and don't forget, the Saturday after Thanksgiving is rivalry weekend.
Exactly.
Ohio State against Michigan, all those great rivalry games. And there'll be a lot on the line as we're getting down to the final weeks of college football. And, as we talked about with Dane, some of these prospects like the Carson Becks have got to show a lot of improvement and build upon the performance that he put out against Tennessee.
Yeah, and so many of these teams, whether it's all the guys from Georgia, the guys from Alabama, the guys from Texas, the guys from Oregon, Ohio State, we'll see if Ole Miss ends up making the playoffs, right? And maybe Colorado if they win the Big 12. All these guys we're talking about, there's a good chance we're going to see them for another 2 or 3 or 4 extra games this year. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to see it, Tone.
Absolutely. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Yeah, you too, Tony. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. Draft season, as always, is brought to you by Moody's, a proud sponsor of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risk into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. For Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda. By the way, anything on Sportskeeda coming up, Tony, that people should keep an eye on?
Well, like Dane, we're going to have a mock draft real soon. If not next week, the week before Thanksgiving, it'll be the week after Thanksgiving. So people can get pumped for that. And we'll also have a top 50, as well as all the announcements, the underclassmen announcements. There's a guy that we've talked about on this podcast that Dane has in his top 50, Mike Green out of Marshall. I've talked about him before, and all signs point to Mike Green of Marshall entering the draft, the third-year sophomore, who's been one of the best pass rushers in the nation this season.
All right, so gear it up, baby. Next draft season, Tony's mock draft. We're going to hold him to it. He better get him right. We don't even know the draft order. It doesn't matter. Tony has to get these guys right in December. He has no choice. And we're going to have some invitations getting accepted, too, to Shrine and Senior Bowl, so we'll keep an eye on that. Maybe we'll welcome in our good buddies back from those 2 games as well. For Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. Thanks for being with us on draft season. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.